Vitamin B3, also known as niacin, is a chemical which can have a couple of different chemical structures, but no matter what type of niacin you're talking about, it's always going to have a pyridine ring, and off of that pyridine ring, there can be a couple of different functional groups. One of these can be a carboxylic acid, and the other can be an amide. If it's carboxylic acid, you just call it niacin, and if it's an amide, you then call it niacinamide. Now, niacin didn't always used to be called niacin, but it used to actually be called nicotinic acid or nicotinamide, depending on what functional group comes off of the pyridine ring. And because of the fact that nicotinic acid is actually very healthy for you, people assumed that nicotine, which comes from tobacco, is also good for you, and so people would think smoking is actually very healthy for them, which is a bit of a misinterpretation, because nicotine and nicotinic acid aren't even really sort of structurally similar in a way. They both have like nitrogens and stuff, but there's a lot of different stuff that happens in the two molecules that is completely unrelated to each other. But the naming made people very confused, understandably, and so the government and stuff, they changed the name that would be like put on the sort of cereal boxes or whatever, or just on the ingredients list and stuff, or would just be generally used throughout society, so that there wasn't this confusion and misinterpretation. So where can you actually find niacin, vitamin B3? In terms of an mg to kg ratio, how many milligrams of niacin are in a kilogram of this specific type of food? The foods where this ratio is highest are yeast, certain meats such as like chicken, turkey, you've even got some beef in there as well, eggs. They all have a high mg to kg ratio, and then you're going to have things like peanuts as well. That's sort of the top, maybe like 8, 9, if you include all the different kinds of meats that are sort of in the like mg to kg ratios, because they're all going to have slightly different ones depending on what kind of animal it actually is. Now, you're also going to have some artificial sources of vitamin B3, such as wheat flour. Plain white wheat flour contains a couple of vitamins, riboflavin and niacin, and it's also going to have iron as well, supplemented into the product. Firms that produce wheat flour have to sort of, they're legally obliged to do this, because otherwise wheat flour is a pretty unhealthy thing for you. It literally is just 99% starch, and nothing, it's just going to go right through you, give you no benefit. It's going to be pretty bad for your gut, because it doesn't contain anything sort of bacteria-wise that's going to be good for your gut. It's just not a very good thing for you. Even though it's not pure sugar, it's just pure carbohydrate. It's going to make you bloat a lot. It's quite a weird phenomenon, because it is literally just pure starch. And so they add the vitamins to sort of mitigate the harmful impact of plain white wheat flour on you. So things such as bread, white bread, they're going to contain vitamin B3 at a very low quantity, admittedly. Like, not as much as something such as yeast would. But I guess because yeast is in bread as well, that would also be a reason the vitamin B3 would be inside of bread. But you sort of see where I'm going with this. Vitamin B3, even though it is inside of wheat flour, it's just not the best source, because the wheat flour itself isn't actually very good for you. And it's still going to be like 97% starch, even with the iron, riboflavin, and niacin actually added to it, even when it was 99% before. Now, the deficiency for vitamin B3 is known as pellagra, and pellagra can lead to a plethora of harmful things such as dermatitis, diarrhea, and because niacin is it's a very, very necessary chemical for the body, it can lead to death if you literally consumed absolutely none of it. Now, it's going to be absorbed in the gut by sodium-dependent diffusion, and another way that you can get niacin into your bloodstream and into your diet is through tryptophan. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid, meaning you must consume it through the diet to actually get any of it. Niacin can actually be made through tryptophan. It goes from like tryptophan, and that'll be a couple steps, then you'll get kynurenine, and then you'll get quinolinic acid and stuff like that, and then you'll eventually get niacin. You need a couple cofactors such as NADPH, vitamin B6, and FAD to get from kynurenine to quinolinic acid as coenzymes in various reactions that happen between those two steps. But that's actually how niacin can be biosynthesized. But because tryptophan is still an essential component for the body, that's why niacin is a vitamin still. But as well as this process only contributes to around 10% of your total blood niacin levels. So you'd still need to consume it in the diet, even if you were having a lot of tryptophan in your body. Now, niacin is stored in the liver as NAD, but when NAD, even though that is also the active form, is needed elsewhere in the body, such as your brain or your muscles, it's going to be hydrolyzed into adenine dinucleotide, I think, and the niacin molecule. That niacin molecule is going to be transported towards your body, other places in your body, and converted again to NAD so they can actually go through its processes that NAD is very useful for. NAD is not the only oxidized active form that niacin is involved with. There is also NADP, which is just NAD with a phosphate group added onto it. And to get to NADP, you just have NAD plus ATP. NAD kinase is the enzyme that catalyzes this reaction, and then you're going to get NADP plus ADP. Now, as well as NAD and NADP, these are the oxidized active forms of the coenzymes. You're also going to have NADH and NADPH, which are the reduced forms. These are electron donors, and NAD plus and NADP plus are electron acceptors. You notice the plus that comes at the end of NAD plus and NADP plus. A minus, E minus, an electron is going to be very attracted to this charge on the oxidized form of the coenzyme. So you can see why that is an electron acceptor and why these are electron donors, because they're reduced. Now, NAD will often be involved in catabolic reactions, meaning the breakdown of certain substances, whereas NADP is going to be involved in anabolic metabolic processes, which often build things up, such as cholesterol synthesis, fatty acid synthesis, and certain stuff like that. Now, an example of a reaction where NAD is very useful is in the enzyme glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase. Dehydrogenase enzymes are the most common enzyme that NAD and NADH will be found in as a coenzyme, and I'm going to go through the sort of specific mechanism of how NAD and NADH is actually very useful, along with some other stuff to do with the proteins and amino acids that are contained inside of the active site of the enzyme. So if you imagine glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, a cysteine amino acid and a histamine amino acid, these two amino acids are in the active site of the enzyme. The H on the end of the cysteine is going to be attracted to the N, which is in the ring in the histamine, and that's going to form an N plus histamine, or just a positive histamine, and it's going to form an S minus on the cysteine. Now, the S minus on the cysteine is going to attack the delta positive carbon, which is on the aldehyde part of the glyceraldehyde molecule, and that's going to form a thioester intermediate. A thioester as a functional group is where you're going to have an oxygen double bond connected to a carbon, then you're going to have a carbon chain on the other side of the molecule. But then on the other side, with the other side of the carbon that the oxygen is connected to, you're then going to have a sulfur, and then there's going to be another chain off of that. Now, the reason that cysteine is actually able to bind to this carbon is because a hydrogen that was previously bound to the carbon has actually been taken by NAD+, and that forms NADH. Now, if you look at the difference in the structures between NAD+ and NADH, you'll see that the NAD+ has 3 double bonds, and the NADH only has 2. This is so that it can allow space for the hydrogen, and now in NADH, the N is actually just a neutral nitrogen now. It's not got any positive charges, not charged whatsoever. Now, to get to G13BP glyceraldehyde 1,3 biphosphate, you're going to need a phosphate group, and this phosphate group is an inorganic phosphate, not anything like ATP, ADP related and stuff like that. This phosphate group will come along, it will attack the delta positive carbon, again the same one that the S is connected to, and it will kick the cysteine off. That can go back to being as part of the active site. It will probably steal histamine's H again, and it will return all to normal so that it can start the process again, and then you're going to have G13BP because the phosphate group has been added onto the carbon. That is essentially how these enzymes often work. There's also going to be slight differences between how different molecules are structured, how they need to be stabilized. For instance, another enzyme, malate dehydrogenase, if you look at a molecule of malate, it's going to have some O- charges where some H+ ions are going to be floating around in wherever place in your body, because it's sort of, it's an acid. Malic acid is an acid, so these OH bonds are going to dissociate sometimes. So arginine, an amino acid, is going to be used to stabilize these O- while the molecule is actually in the active site having things done to it. Now, the mechanism of malate dehydrogenase is actually quite a simple dehydrogenase mechanism to understand. You're going to currently, at this point in time, before malate is actually worked on by the enzyme, have a C bonded to an O, which is bonded to an H, and then a C, it'll be bonded to 2 C's on the other side, and then another H. The product, oxaloacetate, has a C double bond to an O. This means that there are 2 hydrogens that have just gone nowhere. So this is how the dehydrogenase, it's dehydrogenating the malate to form oxaloacetate. This is quite a common dehydrogenase reaction. A histamine inside of the active site of the enzyme will steal one of the H's because the nitrogen in the molecule has a lone pair, and that means it's going to be able to datively covalent bond and form a positive amino acid, and then the NAD plus will be able to steal the other, so then you're easily able to form a C double bond O, and the two hydrogens aren't just going about somewhere random, and they're actually stabilized by certain molecules and chemicals. Now that is the basic process for that kind of dehydrogenase reaction. That's how those dehydrogenase reactions will work. Now the G3P dehydrogenase is slightly different, but because it's got quite an interesting mechanism, I thought I would still include it in the video. Now something such as isocitrate dehydrogenase, which does the exact same thing as malodehydrogenase, turning an OH into a C double bond O, that's also going to have the same kind of process as malate, but it's also going to have a CO2 excreted, which is actually a separate process. So it's not actually interfering with each other. It's not like when I was doing my research and doing my scripting, I thought that would be an interesting mechanism, and it would be the sort of a slightly different thing to malodehydrogenase, and I could include it as a separate sort of thing in my video. But turns out it's basically the same, and the CO2 is just excreted separately. Now that's all for the mechanisms of NAD and NADH. Now they can work in various enzymes, but you're also going to have niacin, vitamin B3 supplements. Supplements are a very common thing inside of the planet nowadays, and I wanted to just give a 2 cents on some research I did on vitamin B3 supplements. Often, if they're taking it in a low dose, it's just to sort of fix the deficiencies that you may currently have, or because you just want more niacin in your body. But high doses can often cause some side effects. They can cause flushing, like skin itching. It will turn very red. It will like itch, and like things like that will happen, and it's just not a very nice feeling. And this is completely irrelevant from anything NAD to NADH related. Niacin is also a lipid balancer. It raises HDL cholesterol, which is the good and healthy kind of cholesterol, not the really artery blocking atherosclerosis type of cholesterol, LDL and VLDL cholesterol. That stuff's not good for you. And niacin raises the actual good cholesterol, which is good, but that only happens in very high doses, and it's completely irrelevant from NAD, NADH and stuff like that. This is sort of its sort of second function, because obviously all the niacin that's going to be in your body is going to be used towards the NAD and NADH processes, because that is clearly very important. Any excess will be used to balance your lipids. That makes sense, right? But in my research, there were just so many weird side effects of vitamin B3. There was a lot of nausea, vomiting, stuff like that. Things that just didn't appear when I was looking at vitamin B2 supplements or whatever. Just seems like niacin is not the best chemical to take in high dose supplements compared to something like vitamin C, which is essentially non-toxic, even up to like things like 1,000 milligrams, 1 gram, 5 grams, still basically non-toxic. But it's just going to be a problem for your gut if there's too much of this one chemical. So that's basically all for niacin. I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the mechanisms of how it works inside of your body. Hope you enjoyed just learning about where you can get it from and some stuff to do with supplements as well. And I hope you found the knowledge useful. But with that, I recommend subscribing for more content like this, and have a good day.